Hi, this is Brian. Welcome back to the Optimal Living interview series. Today I'm thrilled to be chatting with Jocelyn Glei. Jocelyn is the best-selling writer and editor of 3 great books that we featured with Philosopher's Notes: Manage Your Day-to-Day, Make Your Mark, and Maximize Your Potential. They're all really, really great. I recommend each, and we're going to talk about some of my favorite big ideas from each. Jocelyn did those books in partnership with 99U, where she was their founding editor-in-chief. Created an incredible resource there. Check it out at 99U. And again, manage your day-to-day, make your mark, maximize your potential. Jocelyn, this is the first time I've ever chatted with one author about 3 books. Thanks for the great books, and thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
All right, so what was your favorite book out of those 3? Did you have a favorite?
I think Manage Your Day-to-Day was probably my favorite. That was also the first in the series. So I think, the first time that you do anything, the book was the series was designed as a series of books to go together. And I think, sort of that first time you do anything is always kind of the most fun in a certain way.
Right on. Well, Jocelyn worked with a ton of extraordinary writers and thinkers and teachers and kind of collected their wisdom and then kind of thread the needle of the theme of each of these books. But in Manage Your Day-to-Day, you talk about how important routines are. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there's this quote I really like from the writer Stephen King. He has a sort of regular daily routine where he sits down at his desk and he has a glass of water and he has his vitamin and, he does certain things. And he talks about how it prepares your mind to dream. And I think when you do things in this regular rhythm on a daily basis, both your mind and your body kind of start to become alert to those rhythms, and so it becomes easier to do certain things. Like if you, write, whatever your creative activity is, if you write every day in the morning, if you do that at the same time every morning, your mind is almost come sort of pre-prepared, right, for that activity. So I think it's really powerful on that level. On another level, I think routine is really important in terms of aligning with your circadian rhythms. So aligning with the, natural rhythms of your body when your body naturally has a lot of energy and when you naturally experience an energy dip. And those rhythms are unique to everyone, but there's a pretty common kind of arc to them. And you can kind of align, when you do your very demanding tasks with when your energy is highest, and you can align your sort of more mindless tasks with when your energy dips. And then I think the last thing that makes routine so important is setting expectations for everyone around you. We have so much information that we're navigating constantly, from people, so much communication, right? Emails and texts and tweets and phone calls and on and on and on. And how we respond to all of that incoming communication and at what rhythm, people really pick up on it, So if every time you email me, I respond within 5 minutes, you start to expect that, yeah. Right? And so I think we set those expectations with our daily routines, and that's becoming increasingly important because there's so many people sort of, trying to get a little piece of our attention.
No doubt. And I want to hear, just tell me more about your routine. So what do you do? And I'm also tempted to already go into your next book, which is Unsubscribe. I want to talk about that a little bit later, though, but you're already tempting me to go there because it's such an important topic. I'd love to learn more about what you've learned as a writer. How do you structure your days to kind of connect with that muse, as Stephen Pressfield would say?
I have pretty rigorous routine. Rigorous, I should say, just very much the same from day to day. And it does try to align with those circadian rhythms. So most people have kind of the most amount of energy and mental alertness for most people is sort of between about 9 and 11 a.m. So I do my writing for about 3 hours in the morning, typically between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. And, just kind of in 2 sort of, 90-minute-ish sessions with a break in between, which is also, as you probably know, something that we talk about in Manage Your Day-to-Day. Tony Schwartz talks about it, is that 90-minute sprint is kind of like an optimal amount of time to try and focus, and then you need a break. You can't really, you're kind of going to see diminishing returns when you try to focus for longer than 90 minutes typically. So I try to do those sort of 2 90-minute sprints with a little bit of a break. And then in the afternoon, I always focus more on projects that are less demanding for me, creatively speaking. So, most people experience kind of an energy dip after lunch between like 2 and 4 p.m. So during that afternoon time, I just try to do things that, don't demand maximum attention. And maybe are things where if I get interrupted while I'm doing them, or I need to do an interview or I need to have a meeting, it's not going to trouble me to kind of get back into the flow of those things. So that's kind of the general idea of it.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing, and it obviously you unpack that a lot more in the book on a general level. And I interviewed Scott Adams, a Dilbert creator, and he says the exact same thing, right? Match your energy to what needs to get done. And he says exactly the same thing. A little earlier for him is when he feels most alive and when I feel most alive. And he does the kind of mindless stuff in the afternoons. And then I just interviewed Anders Ericsson as well, the 10,000 hour researcher, and just amazing. And the idea that you can only do so much of that great work a day, right? His idea is 4 hours. If you try to do it at the end of the day, good luck, right?
Yeah, and I think it's so hard because that's what so many people end up doing. You don't prioritize the meaningful work, or you don't book time on your calendar for it, maybe in the morning when you have the most energy and attention. And so, all these things creep in, all these requests, over email, or your coworker comes and taps you on the shoulder. And then, it's 3 or 4 p.m. when you turn your attention to that stuff that's really important. And then you just don't have the energy for it.
Yeah, and I remember just to go back to Stephen King, and on writing, he talked about the fact that the hardest time for him in his career was when he just started and he was teaching. And he loved teaching, but at the end of the week, he felt like he had jumper cables to his brain, and he just couldn't sit down and think. And I just love that image, and that's what I feel. If I don't create first thing in the morning, it's really hard for me to tap into that true, pure kind of flow, that I can get before I blow my brain up with everyone else's ideas,
Yeah, and I mean, I think there is there's a kind of background processing that starts to happen. The minute that you open your email, even if you are like, oh, I'm not going to deal with any of this stuff until later. I'm sure you've experienced this, right? You open your email and you check your inbox, and maybe there's a certain level of anxiety around certain messages, and it's really hard to just like push that aside and say, okay, well, now I'm going to just focus and go to my Zen place and start writing.
Exactly.
So I think it's really important to just, say, okay, well, I'm going to push that off 2 hours and do my writing.
Yeah. Right
first.
On. Yeah. We like to call that be creative before you're reactive.
Yeah.
That's super good. And then the next idea, again, tangentially touches the cornerstone of your next work, but you talked about wealth of information and poverty of attention. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that comes from a sort of famous quote from the economist Herbert Simon, and he was the creator, really, of the idea of an attention economy, which you hear sort of bandied about fairly frequently these days. That was actually back in the 70s as he sort of originated that concept, and the idea is that a wealth of information will result in a scarcity of whatever that information consumes. And of course, what information consumes is attention. And, there's so many things competing for our attention every minute of every day. And as new technologies and new apps come online, that competition keeps growing. And I think it's just a really challenging setting that we live in right now to kind of stay focused and to be productive and to be creative.
Let's go down that a little bit more and talk about, we'll come back and talk more about make your market, maximize your potential as well. But tell me more about your focus right now, unsubscribe. I can't wait to hear more about how to deal with that. What are you suggesting, or what are you kind of researching and presenting in that book?
Yeah, well, unsubscribe is really about my kind of current obsession really is the topic of distraction. And, obviously sort of that's the competition for attention, of course, which we were just talking about. And I think that unsubscribe really focuses on email and kind of after that social media. And email is really our number one distraction in the workplace, right? There's like some crazy numbers, like the average person checks their email, reads a response to 122 emails a day, wow. Checks their email 11 times an hour, and spends 28% of their work week on their email, right? Wow. So it's over a quarter of your work week that you're spending on email, which is insane. And I think that we all kind of the funny thing about email, right, is we all kind of like just already hate it so much that we kind of don't even think about it anymore. We're just sort of like slaves to it a little bit, I think.
Yep.
And so unsubscribe is really about, why are we, first, it gets into the psychology of email and social media and these other things that are really random reward systems, and talks about why those are actually really addictive for our brains. And then goes into sort of different other psychology about email and social media and all these other distractions that we contend with, and sort of unpacks why we get so addicted to it and why, having a overflowing inbox makes us feel so guilty, and why we feel the need to like always respond to other people's emails. Because there's a lot of actually quite interesting psychology behind those things. And I think once you understand that psychology, you can kind of disarm those temptations a bit, and be a lot more conscious moving forward. And so that's kind of the first part of the book, is really talking about the psychology of addiction. And then kind of getting into, okay, now that we understand why we're so addicted to this thing, how can we, create goals and routines and understand what's really important versus what feels urgent in order to, stay more focused on the work that truly matters, the work that's really meaningful, rather than, letting our inbox dictate what we do with our day.
I cannot wait to read that. That's great. Cal Newport inspired me with deep work, and then his little Harvard Business Review article on a world without email. And 3 months ago, I just left email, and my assistant just puts emails that I get, which are considerably lower than before. I'm like, if it's really important, let me know. I'm here, Otherwise, I'm out of email. I'm a hermit right now. And it's crazy. I didn't know the stats, but I'm sure I was spending close to that amount of time in email, the 26 or whatever it was %.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think that the interesting thing about email, and why I devoted, the better part of a book to the topic, is that it's kind of, right, if distraction is our biggest challenge today, which I really think it is, and I think it's going to be the biggest challenge at least for the next decade or so in terms of sort of being productive and, creating really valuable work, you have to, learn how to harness your attention and avoid distractions. And email is almost like the sort of perfect object lesson in how you deal with distraction. Like if you can deal with your email successfully, and sort of resist that temptation, everything that you apply there kind of carries over to anything else, whether it's your coworkers interrupting you or how you deal with social media. So I think it's this kind of interesting, almost like, in the book, I call it kind of a pop quiz for your attention. If you pass that test, if you're able to kind of not let your email really inveigle its way into stealing all of your attention, then, you're going to be in a good place for being able to stay focused on your work. And if you're the type of person who just can't figure out how to not be distracted by your email, then, you're really in trouble, probably.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure the book will give us some tips on how to manage that and take those next steps. But it's an addiction. I mean, there's no question about it. That dopamine hit again. Okay, so we're going to talk about that more. But seed planted, and I cannot wait to check out Unsubscribe. Yes. Well, let's go back to manage your day-to-day and just check in there. We obviously only talked about the daily routines, poverty of attention, et cetera. Is there anything that your favorite idea in that book that you want to chat about?
Well, one of them is the one that I just mentioned, which was this notion of random rewards, which kind of came up when I interviewed the behavioral economist Dan Ariely.
Oh yeah, that was so good.
And manage your day-to-day. And I'm not going to go too deep into that, because so that actually kind of launched me on this path towards Unsubscribe and getting deeper into distraction and understanding random rewards. But the other concept I think that's super powerful and so simple is one from Cal Newport, who you mentioned earlier, the author of Deep Work, who contributed to Manage Your Day-to-Day. And it's just the very simple concept of focus blocks. I think that, and he talks about basically, okay, whenever you want to be doing, we were just talking about daily routines, right? And finding time to do the important work, maybe before you check your email in the morning. And Cal's a big advocate of, really blocking that time out on your calendar, so blocking out an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours in the morning, so that you have these kind of focused blocks in order, to really kind of defend your time against interruptions. And I think that it's something that sounds sort of so obvious, but I think so many of us fail to do it. And particularly if you're someone who's working, in an office where you have a public calendar, where any one of your coworkers can potentially just put a meeting on your calendar at any time. When you're working in that setting, blocking out, meeting time for yourself as well, for you to do the work that you need to do becomes incredibly important, right? Because if you don't do that, like all these other little meetings and calls and things just kind of slip in, and you're sort of left with these, crappy little 20 or 30 minute windows of time in which to do your most important work. And you just can't really, get any momentum or get into that deep creative flow place when you're working in those tiny time blocks. So I think it's, really, it's just so important to be proactive about, blocking out that time in the same way, and then respecting it in the same way that you would a meeting with someone else. I think it's kind of crazy how much people in, office settings and co-working settings will respect a meeting you're having with someone else, but they completely do not respect your space or your focus when you're just trying to actually do something, on your own that you need to do for yourself.
Well, and I love that idea too, and just that idea of having these blocks and systematizing them so you don't need to redo it every day. It's just you do this, like you were saying, you're writing, right, 9 to 12. Mm-hmm. It is funny for me to notice how I don't respect my own blocks as much as I could, mm-hmm. let alone other people kind of intruding. It's just it's a challenge to say no, right? To have that deep yes of this is what I'm going to do, and have the courage to say no to other things that are kind of sort of nice to do, but not necessarily the most central.
I think it's huge. And I think you constantly have to be doing, I kind of do this thing that I call sort of zooming in and zooming out, which is kind of, zooming in would be like, okay, what do I have to do today? Right? Like today's to-do list. But the zooming out is, for me here in my office, I have this, I have a calendar on the wall, and then I have a list of my goals, and I have my goals for the next 6 months, and I have a few projects, and for each project I have what the goal is, and then I have the sort of key actions that I need to take to reach that goal. And that's right, the zoomed out perspective, like where am I trying to go in the big picture, and then when I zoom in and I think about today, I actually have a very clear concept of where I'm trying to go. And I think what happens so frequently is that we're all just so sucked into the now. There's so many things that are really based on instant gratification, looking at your Twitter notifications or looking at Instagram or watching Netflix Instant, or, we're really getting into this world of instant gratification and just completely living in the now. Mm-hmm. But I think that, right, if you only focus on the now, it's like what seems appealing in this moment is usually not the hard work.
Yeah. Especially when it's a reactive now, right?
Precisely. And so I think, but we're all kind of living this very zoomed in state. And so I think we kind of have to constantly oscillate between sort of zooming in, okay, what am I trying to do now? But zooming out, like, where am I trying to go? Yeah. And I think that it's really easy not to sort of ever zoom out, because we have so many things that are kind of there to entertain us in the moment, but you have to become very adept at doing that.
Right on. That goes back to distraction, and the biggest challenge for the next decade at least. That's awesome. And that also is a perfect segue into Make Your Mark. So Make Your Mark, the creative's guide to building a business with impact. The place I wanted to start that chat was kind of the ultimate zoom out. And you talk about purpose and how it all starts with purpose. Can you talk to us about why? And then I want to drill into some practical ways to help us get more clarity.
Yeah, I think purpose is so important, right? And we're talking about the context of a business here, but it could also be, you as a person. So kind of what's your personal purpose, or what's your personal mission? And I think we see that increasingly as a way that companies are organizing themselves, right? So, you think about companies like Google, where, what part of their purpose is do no evil, but the other is to organize the world's information, right? And that is an extremely flexible purpose. And I think that's really important because with the pace that technology is advancing, what you need to do or what you need to be as a business is changing so rapidly. And so purpose allows a business, rather than say organizing your business around just a specific product, we'll say organizing your business around a purpose allows you to kind of pivot very quickly and move into different spaces while still being true to yourself without feeling like you're kind of locked down into this, one particular product or one particular approach when, kind of technology and people's needs and wants are changing so quickly, right? And of course, you see that with companies like Google, right? Started out as a search engine and, now they're making self-driving cars and who knows what they'll go on to next. And that kind of all aligns with their, it all aligns with their mission, but allows them to be extremely flexible and adaptable. And I think that is also very important on a personal level, whereas you kind of used to see people organize more around like a specific job, Yep. Now you see people organizing a bit more around a mission. And again, it's because it allows you to be flexible and adaptable. You have to be constantly kind of changing and updating your skill set based on technology, based on what's happening in the market. But the mission can kind of guide you through all that.
So I'm curious if you're open to share kind of how you frame your own purpose as a writer, solopreneur, however you would describe your kind of business entity. I'll start by sharing ours. Not every morning, but every morning either look at what I wrote or write it again. Our purpose with our main businesses in Theos, it's to help people optimize their lives. We help people, next line, optimize. That's just what we do. And then to your point, there's a lot of different ways that has manifested and will continue to manifest, from the wisdom, some community stuff, etc. But how would you frame your purpose?
For me, it's really about helping people find more meaning and creativity in their daily work. So, right now, that relates largely to writing books and, to writing blog posts and doing a newsletter. But obviously that can expand, right? It's sort of very flexible. It can expand to lots of different things,
Right on. Then for people who are maybe looking to discover more clarity on their purpose, what's your number one favorite tip to help them do so?
I think it's pretty basic. I think it's thinking about what, your sort of specific skills and talents are on the first level. And then secondly, thinking about how those skills and talents really align with the marketplace and what people actually need. I think that a lot of the classic career advice, sort of focuses only on that first part, is thinking about like, that idea of like finding your passion. But, you really need to like take it to that second level beyond like, okay, but what do people actually need and how can I meet that need? That's sort of like the important second step for it not to be a very quixotic activity. And one of the things I think is interesting too is to think about the things that you did when you were a kid or a teenager that you were kind of naturally drawn to, particularly if you're sort of like, really kind of struggling to figure out what that thing is for you. For me, I've always been obsessed with publishing. So even when I was like 15 or 16, I was like making a zine by hand and like passing it out at my high school, and I think you see people who are entrepreneurs like always have stories about, like selling chocolate bars at school or just weird like things that are related to like selling things, whereas like, and I'm like, it would have never occurred to me to like try to make money on something when I was 16. I was like, I want to write some things and share it with you.
But you can feel it. You can feel the energy of you creating your own little, magazine or whatever it was when you were that young in your book, because the style of the book, the feel of it, it's art, right? And there's, from my experience of it anyway, and the consistency of the brand, you can totally feel that coming through. That's awesome.
Right, thank you.
What else in Make Your Mark? Favorite idea that we haven't talked about yet?
I think my favorite moment in that book is actually the last essay, which is by Seth Godin. And it's sort of a rallying call to starting a business. And he says that if you wait until you're ready, it's almost certainly too late. And that's a quote that I think about a lot. I think I myself am certainly guilty of this. And I think most people are of kind of, you're sort of waiting for a sign or waiting for everything to be perfect to kind of get going on a project or a business. And I think in actuality, you never get that moment, and you kind of only feel that moment of readiness, like 1/3 of the way into the project or 2/3, or maybe even when it's finished, you're like, oh, I was ready, but you can't actually feel that until you've already kind of got that momentum behind you, I think.
That's awesome. I love that essay too, and love Seth and just the idea of shipping it, right? And
yeah.
If you feel ready, that's the sure sign that you waited too long. Like, just go for it. It's kind of funny. The next class I'm going to be teaching, we do a bunch of Optimal Living 101 classes, is on Conquering Perfectionism 101. We're going to talk about that, of just being willing to get out and starting before we're ready. That's awesome. Well, let's go to the third in our trilogy, Maximizing Your Potential. This book has 4 key areas for maximizing our potential. I want to talk about 2 of them. The first one is, how do we cultivate our expertise over time? Talk to us about that.
Cultivating expertise over time. I'm literally like opening up Maximize Your Potential
Let's go there.
as we talk about it. One of my favorite concepts from that section is the essay from Heidi Grant Halvorson, who's an author and a researcher. She actually studied with Carol Dweck, who's the author of Mindset, I believe.
Yeah.
And she talks about the importance of focusing on getting better versus being good. And she talks about sort of the being good mindset versus the getting better mindset. And it really ties back into what you were just talking about perfectionism. Is that it's very limiting when you're kind of in this being good mindset. So like for me, I might say like it's a lot around how you frame your goals. So I could say, well, I want to be a good public speaker, right? That could be my goal. But it's actually very kind of limiting to frame the goal in that way, and also kind of leaves a lot of room open for me to maybe fall short or critique myself if I'm not I don't immediately get to that goal. Yep. And so she talks about kind of framing things more in terms of getting better. So, instead of saying I want to be a good public speaker, or I want to be the best public speaker, say, well, I want to improve my public speaking ability. So I kind of put myself on a timeline of learning, which is, sort of much more forgiving and also much easier to see progress, rather than just kind of focusing on this very rigid kind of being good goal. And I think, to me, that's, I told you I have a list of goals here on the wall. And to me, that's really powerful. And especially if you're susceptible to perfectionism, is kind of trying to stay in that getting better mindset and frame your goals and your actions in terms of that getting better mindset, to, be a little bit more forgiving and just kind of allow yourself to take some baby steps and get motivated.
That's awesome. I really like the way you described that. I love Heidi's work too. But you just framed it in a way that really helped me see it more powerfully. Because when our goal and our mindset is to be good as a perfectionist, and I am certainly still a recovering perfectionist, there's that, your data you're going to find is all the evidence that you didn't do it as well as you wanted to, right?
Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't hit my potential at any given moment, of course, because we're never going to do that, right? Whereas with the getting better, the data hunt is for, data that shows, wow, okay, I did do that a little bit better than I did before. That needs some work still, but I did that better than I did, and that's awesome. I'm going to go do a little bit better next time. And there's just such a healthier opportunity to actually express ourselves and to evolve, right?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And also, if you are a perfectionist type of person, then I think it's extremely likely, maybe 100% likely, that you have a very powerful critical facility. And in that context,
she says diplomatically.
Well, I know I am one of those people. So in that context of knowing you're going to be the type of person who's going to be hard on yourself, framing things in a way where you can, give yourself a little more room to see progress is really important, I think.
Well, that ties perfectly to the final idea I wanted to talk about in that book, which was the willingness to take risks. And one of the things that Carol Dweck talks about, that Heidi talks about as well, of course, is that idea that when we have a fixed mindset or a be good mindset, we're not willing to take risks because we never want to look anything but perfect, right? So can you talk to us about, if we want to maximize our potential, why it's so important to be willing to embrace risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my favorite moments in that particular chapter of the book was this conversation that I had with Tina Seelig, who's a professor at Stanford, and she talks about thinking about how she makes her students think about their risk profile. So I think that one of the things that makes people a little bit afraid of risk taking or concerned about risk taking is they think that it's more sort of like this fixed quality, like he's a risk taker, she's a risk taker, like just sort of globally. When in fact, she talks about everyone having sort of a different risk profile. So, you might like be the type of person who's really into doing, risky activities like skydiving, and to you, like that doesn't seem scary at all, but you would never go to a huge party by yourself, right? Whereas I have like no problem, say, socially taking risks. I'm totally fine on my own. I'm happy to chat up a random stranger, but risks that involve bodily harm or jumping out of airplanes, seem terrifying to me. So I think it's kind of interesting to break down that topic of risk and the idea of risk taking and think about, where are the areas in which you are okay with taking risks, and what's kind of your risk profile. And then one of the other activities that she has her students do, which I think is awesome, is she makes them do a failure resume. All right, because of course, most resumes, we just list our accomplishments. We don't think about the things that we failed at. I think she says the students at first are always kind of like what? Like they're very resistant to the idea, but and I've done this for myself. I did a piece, I think for 99U years ago about one of my greatest failures. And I think what's interesting about going through that process of doing the failure resume is usually all the things that you put on there, a lot of them like don't seem like that big of a deal when you kind of look back on them, or maybe it was a big deal, but you learned something that was so valuable that it feels like it was certainly worth the risk that you took. And I think kind of doing that activity as well and kind of reflecting on where you took risks and what you learned, or where you thought something was a particularly big risk. And actually, maybe you failed, but it wasn't that big of a deal, or you succeeded and, it wasn't kind of as scary as you expected. So I think doing that failure resume is an interesting activity to kind of, let's say, demystify risk taking a little bit.
That's awesome. And even as I do it in my head, you can just see that the lines that go from this risk, that failure, to this growth, this opportunity that never would have existed had I not been willing to, for me, dropping out of law school was the most horrible thing I could have done when I did it. And it just absolutely sucked at the time. But that was the seed from which I created my first business. I never would have done if I hadn't done that. And all the, and I can, up to the most recent ones, it's just really cool to be able to have that arc, to kind of see the hero's journey that requires us to be willing to go up against those mythical dragons, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, a lot of times it's just not as, as big a deal as we think it'll be, kind of heading into it. Yeah. You come out on the other side and you're like, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, and then you do it enough times and it's like, okay, well, now in the moment of experiencing that oops, can we look back and see the pivots that we went through before, /failures, /whatever we want to call them, right?
Yeah.
And see that they're part of the process, and hopefully navigate it with more grace and power this time around. So good.
And that makes me, there's just one other point from that particular section of the book that's really stuck with me, is this essay by Michael Schwalb, and he talks about some of the research around the way other people perceive our failures. And I mean, I think one of the studies that he recounts actually was one in which people were made to wear a Barry Manilow t-shirt, like when they went to hang out with their friends or something like that. And, it kind of talks about how, like, when they were like, oh my God, like people are going to judge me so hard, like it's going to be so embarrassing. And then, it turns out then they talk to the people who were present and it's like, oh, well, no one else actually, maybe 1 out of 10 people like even noticed you were wearing a Barry Manilow t-shirt. And, the kind of basic takeaway from that study was that we kind of tend to blow up the impact of our failures or our shortcomings or embarrassing things that happen to us, and how they'll be perceived by other people. We tend to sort of really blow that up. But what we fail to think about is how much other people are really just concerned with whatever they have going on. They're just, it turns out they actually have their own worries and thoughts and problems and things they're excited about. And they're really just not as focused on you as you thought they were.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And then it's Brene Brown style too, of what we want to most see in people is their vulnerability, but what we least want to do is show our vulnerability. Right?
Yeah.
So that willingness to kind of be honest and be open and to be willing to show off that failure resume, right? Is what opens the doors for a true connection and all that good stuff. As long as you don't need to wear a Barry Manilow t-shirt, we're okay.
They're probably hard to find these days.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, we so barely scratched the surface. I appreciate you being willing to bounce through 3 different books in such a brief conversation. And I'm so excited about Unsubscribe. And just to go back, though, on Manage Your Day-to-Day, Make Your Mark, Maximize Your Potential, I highly recommend all 3. They go really well together. They're kind of like beautiful little coffee table books. As I said, Jocelyn introduces different themes and then invited just an amazing selection of world-class thinkers to share their thoughts in very concise, more wisdom and less time style. So check those out. And then when can we look forward to Unsubscribe?
It's coming out on October 4th. I think it's already available for pre-order on Amazon. And I have some more information on my website at jkglei.com/unsubscribe.
That was my next question. So then tell us the website again.
It's jkglei.com.
Perfect. And then /unsubscribe for more. And then I cannot wait to get the book, have another one of these chats, and dive in even more deeply there. So Jocelyn, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's a pleasure.
Hi, this is Brian. A lot of people don't know all the stuff I do beyond these free videos I share on YouTube, so I thought I'd do a quick video to give you an overview of our membership program that you can get access to and get a ton of other stuff. So here's a quick look. $10 a month, join the Optimal Living membership program. You get instant access to 250 Philosopher's Notes on some of the best Optimal Living books out there. Old school classics, positive psychology, modern stuff, mindfulness, peak performance, purpose, neuroscience, wealth, etc. And what you may not know is that in addition to the PNTV episodes, I create PDFs on all of these great books. So 6-page PDFs. Let's take a look at one of them. Joseph Campbell. You want to figure out how to live your hero's journey. Well, this is a great place to start. I basically pull out my favorite big ideas, riff on them, connect them to other books and other ideas, and help you apply this wisdom to your life today. That's what the PDF looks like. Again, we have 250 of these on all these different great books. And then I record those PDFs as an MP3. So you can listen to that MP3 while you're on a walk or working out or doing some errands or whatever. That is Philosopher's Notes. A lot going on there. And then in addition to Philosopher's Notes, you get access to Optimal Living classes, Optimal Living 101. Idea here is that all those great teachers come back to the same big ideas again and again and again. I distill those ideas into classes. Super practical, fun, inspiring classes ranging from Habits 101, Confidence 101, Getting Stuff Done 101, Meditation 101, instant access to all those classes. And then future classes include Relationships 101, Energy 101, Purpose 101, Business, Goals, etc. Those are our full-length classes. And then I create micro classes, 2 to 3 to 5 minute little bursts of wisdom on my favorite great ideas from these great books across the domains that you want to optimize in your life. So we have dozens of these so far. I create 50 new micro classes every month and 10 new Philosopher's Notes every month for $10 a month. So we're blessed to have thousands of members who are enjoying the program and sharing some incredibly kind words with us. And super simple, $10 a month, cancel anytime. Would be honored to be a bigger part of your life. And I appreciate your support. And here's to optimizing and actualizing.